conditions has this been recorded? And if we don't have that, we fall into the problem that we cannot really understand what we have there. So I think we have to rethink about metadata and about what is needed now that we can look back decades and centuries, and we know what is missing. We should learn from that for our nowadays archiving principles. And I think free access is something like understood, and also the ability to upload own things. But there needs to be rules for that. Some metadata might be generated on the fly by analyzers, but a lot of that will never be auto-generated. So we have to see if somebody has the right to upload data, what is the required additional information that we have to put in there.
There's not much to add to all these ideas. I mean, they were quite complete already, it seems, although except one part maybe, the archive in itself, the very space and the very objects that stand there. We tend to go so digital, be so enthused by the possibilities of exchange and the frameworks that we might establish so that people could use the material, that every now and then we tend to forget that actually the objects themselves can be fascinating as well. So a shellac disk, having had the first generation of students who asked me, like, how do I know the difference between a vinyl single and a vinyl LP? And I'm like, what? How could you know that? Which is, of course, today it tends to be back in knowledge. Of course, everybody knows again what these are, but there was a generation in between that just didn't know it anymore. And that even those very objects, the aura of the objects, they imagine that this was played in 1957, Accra, shortly after independence, and people dance to this very record that we're having here in our hands now. Gives you the opportunity in teaching to present something as well. So on the spot as well, to not forget that even archives themselves are places of encounters every now and then.
Well, I guess to me, I mean, I worry about just too much. I guess we have such a large collection. There's too much. If you have this digital archive of so many recordings, that things will get lost. You really have to have like a system where you're, again, scanning the original field notes and doing everything, all the ancillary materials, and putting in serious metadata. I mean, I put in stuff that has to do with subject matter about songs. So someone might be researching, a puberty right or something like that in different countries. If you're just putting, if that's in there, they'll find it, right? But then you get into people who know what they're looking for. I think that we've tried to do is to make allies out of people who are scholars and other people out there who put in like articles and blogs and information, and so that there might be somebody might be reading and someone might mention this is like something, and someone might actually stumble on something. I mean, I've always talked about there's the concept I learned in library school of gatekeepers. Is there's people in different communities who like dig really deeply into everything and learn everything, and then they are the ones that introduce other people, other musicians. I found this in the American folk music. There's people who all of a sudden knew this stuff, and then other people who became famous, more famous than them, learned songs, like Bob Dylan learned songs from them, and they were really the people who generated that. Is to tap into those kinds of people to help you in your giant project. So their information's in there too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. Maybe I must first introduce self, or I don't know, because I haven't in this section, and I didn't have, or maybe later. Yeah. Question? Maybe you.
We have the problem that we have 3 days of program and only 2 of these roundtables, and so Professor Azadeh has not yet had a talk, so he has not been introduced, which I now will fix. This is Professor Koehn Azadeh from Tehran in Iran, and he's a professor of music there, specializing in piano and especially also Iranian piano music. So he's not an archivist in any way, but as he has published widely on these things, I think he can also contribute to this. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. You would like? Okay. I don't know, maybe for generation to generation musical culture is different. For example, from my experience in Iran, my professor, one of my old professors, he can speak in many languages, and he has think about anything in details. But now the students in maybe every university, because I did my PhD in Germany, I know that this culture, and also in US, I don't know why the students and scholars going to the maybe some surface, not from deep things. For example, what is the musical culture of each country? For example, for this program that it's developed here in Hamburg, in the university, in this software that would like recognize the typical music for every country, every culture. Maybe we would like find some typical music, but it's now, I have a question. What is how we can find the musical culture of each country or each culture? Because Persian music, for example, I come from Iran, Persia. Persian music has different, now there is fusion Persian music that's influenced from the Western music, from pop music, from some light music too. But there is some museum music, very historical and traditional music. But how we can find this musical culture of each country? That is actually a question. Yeah.
Okay, please.
I just have thought of something. If we have an archive with all these information, you could get it from the archive, right? So the only question is how to present it and how to do some sample recordings that would be representative for this kind of culture. So one could think of maybe some typical tunes, like if you asked for Sweden for some singing examples, I think Swedes would immediately say, okay, take this, and that. So why don't we do this for the other countries? So try to find some representative music and maybe some instruments that are stored in such a way that sample tunes or sample even notes could be used by the user of the archive. So imagine that you plug in your MIDI instrument or you're playing some keyboard, and then there are some melodies that you can follow that are typical tunes, so that they sound in the color of a sitar or any instrument. There is a perspective today to have physical modeling of these instruments on the fly. So you just use your computer or you click on the screen and you get a typical sound. And this is then, for me, the work of an archive to present it in a proper way that people using it get the impression, oh, this is how it sounds in that country. So they can switch on the globe and make a turn and say, oh, no, I want an Icelandic variation. How does the instrument sound there? Why not? It would be some work to do, but why not?
Okay, yes, please, Rolf.
Well, from the perspective of systematic musicology, the answer would be contrary to that, or the question would be contrary to that. We are more interested what all makes it all unite, and not what splits us apart. You know, if everybody's looking for his cultural identity, then there may be a good reason for this, and everybody can have his cultural identity. But there's a political problem in it. You know, if you have too much identity, you're split apart. And this is my example with the Panjan Baja bands or the drum and chant bands, is that you have a musical style which is similar in many countries, and it has developed in certain ways here and there. But in the end, you know, we were more interested in the universals, in the laws of which govern music all around the world. Of course, also in the specialities. But there's always a tension between what certain cultures are doing and what the universals are. Yeah? We focus more on the universals because this is what was the systematic thing about systematic musicology. Otherwise, we would be music history and to split them all apart.
So all of us, we have dreams about future archives and what could be the best for us. I would like to ask the audience as well to give your comments. Do you have some ideas about the ideal archive for you before I will go to next quite difficult question topic, please.
I've find one of the essential riches of archive should be not only that you find whatever you're looking for, but that you find whatever you're not looking for. And that's why I found the structure the guys from Hamburg presented today with the map so incredible. As a student, it's fantastic too. You just go and look for something you know, and you find similar things you don't know. So I think this is a really, really important thing to be in an archive. It's like a library. I like to work in a library where just I go to the bookshelf and I don't find the book I'm looking for. I find 50 books about the same issue. So.
Any other?
For me, an archive would be useful for. It's okay, I can talk without.
We're recording this, so if you don't use the mic,
okay.
Nobody will.
So for me, an archive would be useful for new musicians. For example, the useful scenario in my mind is that I am a musician, I upload my piece, and I find similar pieces in time and in space, in history as well as in the globe. So I find similarities, and I find things that maybe have influenced my artistic expression, let's say. So that's the thing for me. I think an archive should not only target musicologists, but also musicians, to find influences of their music. So
okay.
That needs quite a lot of computation, basically.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's go to the second topic, which is a bit more difficult. This was easy question, easy topic, I suppose. The next question I have in my mind is somehow related to the concept of ethnomusicology. So we speak during these days about ethnomusicological archives. And I suppose that many of you know that this term is concept is quite problematic. What does it mean to be ethnic, distant, or so? For example, if we speak about if I'm a Balinese person, what does it mean for me? The concept of ethnic instruments. Is it a Finnish kantele or is it a classical instrument, a Western classical instrument? So this is complicated concept. And in the field of ethnomusicology, we very often we don't speak about, we don't use that term very often anymore because of those problems. And today, when I made a question about synthesizers, for example, what is the role of the new instruments and how difficult the future can be from this point of view? People are playing smartphones in African jungles or small rural villages, and the whole world is changing very rapidly. And what is the answer of archives to these kind of conceptual problems we have with this term, ethnomusicology? And this is the next question.
Yes. And also in this direction, the same meaning. I mean, for example, violin in India, they play violin, but violin is a European instrument, but they play with some Indian music. I mean, but what is this, for example? How played? I mean, welche Rolle spielt? I mean, how plays this kind of music in ethnomusicology, or for example, flute or violin or guitar and piano too. In Romanian, for example, I hear some people can change the tune of piano and they play folklore music. That's very traditional. That's not European music. Absolutely, that's not relation to the classical European music. But it's ethnomusicological music. I mean, that's the. Actually, that's the ethnic music, or that's the fusion music, or in which categories, actually? Because archive, we must have some categories. We must categorize the different kind of music, actually. That's.
So perhaps I could just specify my question still. Music as culture. How we can take this idea into account in archives? We discussed this topic today after certain presentations, but this is quite serious question for these archives. But please.
Well, okay. This whole issue of the verbiage we use to describe what we're doing and the way we name our field, this has bugged us from the beginning. 100 years ago it was called primitive music, then it was comparative musicology, then we found out that we do not compare any more than any other discipline, and so then ethnomusicology came up, but that's still kind of a deficit diagnosis, because ethnic usually rings like a difference, not art music or not the real music we do, but just their music. So, but we spent a lot of time doing. I think right now what Birgit Abel is doing in Göttingen is now to name what they are doing cultural musicology, which is rather a refinement of this ethnic term. But as you said, we have to make categories to be able to communicate about things, and as long as we do not take these categories unquestioned and scrutinize what we are actually talking about in terms of content, I'm pretty okay with ethnomusicology, actually, as long as we are aware of the fact we are an ethnicity too. So Brahms and Beethoven is also ethnic music. It's just not their ethnic music, is ours. That's my 5 cents.
Well, another point which comes here is a political one, which is an academic political one. You know, the institutionalization of historical musicology and systematic musicology and ethnomusicology has some positions and has some money in it, and there are houses concerned, and there are PhDs being done, and so on. And so everybody who is in the field says, okay, this is what we do, and we do something different like the others, and so we need to be maintained. Yeah. There's no way of overlooking that. And if we would be perfectly free, I'm not sure if we would discuss this topic really. But as we are not free and we depend on public funding, we need to select our terms in a way that we recognize we are different, or we are necessary, or we are not like the others. This is a struggle which everybody of us experiences. It may not be the whole story, but it restricts our discussion in a way.
I definitely agree. This was something I was thinking of as you were asking this question, that I think most people who define themselves as, or a lot of people who define themselves as ethnomusicologists already kind of know that Mozart had an ethnicity, and that, you know, that's an important part. And, you know, we sort of, or certainly I do, I problematize this idea with my students, this idea of what does it mean to say world music? Like, wasn't Bach also from the world? You know, what does it mean to call something ethnic music versus not? And really it's a problem at the institutional level. And yes, we should always be questioning the kind of vocabulary we're using. But I think there's some music programs now that are trying to, at least at the undergraduate level, sort of, I don't want to say level the playing field, but so for instance at Harvard right now, they've just, I don't know very much about it, but they've just removed basically all of the specific requirements to get an undergraduate degree in music from Harvard. So you don't have to take, you know, 3 semesters of music theory and however many semesters of Western music history. You have to take a certain number of music classes, but they can be from any sub-area you choose, from any area that's interesting to you. And it's too new for me to decide if I think that's a good idea or not, but I think there's definitely a push, at least sort of philosophically, intellectually, that we don't want to be this divide between ethnic music and music theory and music history as very, very different things, and that feels uncomfortable. But institutionally, I think it's a problem, and I think it will be a problem maybe for a couple more generations while we sort of, you know, when the one historical musicologist retires, that's a historical musicology line, and how do we if we give that to the ethnomusicologists, is that a political faux pas? And you know, that's problematic at the institutional level. But I think at the intellectual and at the philosophical level, we're already trying to grapple with these ideas that we're not in these little boxes, that a lot of us straddle the lines, and we want our students to think about straddling the lines, and I think a lot of our research straddles the lines. Is that something that an archive can address? That's a hard question. I think part of how it can address it is just to allow nuance to exist in every, so for instance, for me, I wouldn't want to say this is a representative example of Balinese music because that sort of essentializes this idea of what Bali is, versus here are the 50,000 examples you've heard of Bach and Sibelius, and you know that comes from the Western classical tradition. So I think just exposure and archives can help a great deal with that, to sort of nuance our ideas about what music is in other places, and then just like in the West, where a lot of us are educated and work, we'll understand that there are many different types of music coming in from any of these places, so we don't think about it as all the crazy amounts of Western music and then the rest of the world. You know, we start to think, oh, Indonesia has as many musics as Germany does, and to just understand nuance, I think, and an archive can help with that, I hope. I don't know, maybe that's idealist. Yeah.
Thank you. Just realized that you're always sitting at the end, but yeah, maybe you can turn the other way around. Next round. So yeah, what I think about this ethnologic, I'm an engineer, so I'm very far from this approach. But what I realize at the Tonmeister Institute is that when it comes to authentic or to optimized recordings of music, you have to learn so much about how the music was composed, how it was thought of. And if you don't have that knowledge, then you get some recording, but it will not be satisfactory. So you have to bring all this knowledge, and this is where archives come into play, I think. They give examples of the performance. They give you the insight, how it was done. So this is something that an archive could actually do. It could just demonstrate how it could be done. It doesn't need to be the best, but it could be representative. And I think it is on the mind and the brain of the users then to figure out whether it was a good representation or not. And I come back to this idea of having samples. I just thought further. Why not having like a general MIDI file for each sound example from a different culture, from a different country, that you could download as a template of sound of that country, so that if you put it in your machine, you can just play that style. I just listened to the detuned piano and I thought, oh, wow. How can you explain this to students that you can play music with a detuned piano? They're always suffering from detuned pianos in our university, but this is something different that you learn. There's a different kind of scaling that you can do. And I think this is the first thing that when I think about ethnic is that it's expensive, but if you look at Thomann, if you want to order instruments, they are very expensive. And Hank instruments, a steel drum, that costs thousands of euros. And all the simple things that you get along with in Western countries, they are almost inexpensive now. So this is the first thing. So a lot of people will not have the chance to experience these different instruments because they are so expensive. Or you have to bring them from somewhere. But you have to have friends then, or you have to have somebody traveling there, bringing back music instruments. So I think most of my ethnic instruments were presents from people bringing them to make me presents. But this could an archive be. The archive could bring these presents to you, the music, and make it available to you so that you have the chance to listen to things that you would need to travel very far. So about the realization, I don't know, but there are things that you could do, I think.
I could try to sneak out easily by saying, well, I'm anthropologist, none of my business. But given that anthropology in German translates as ethnology, I'm out of it. Ethnologie, we say it usually in Germany. Although our association currently changed its name from Gesellschaft für Völkerkunde zu Deutsche Gesellschaft für Sozial- und Kulturanthropologie. So even there is the change of names and trying to slip. And interestingly, although most anthropologists here in Germany tend to call themselves ethnologen, they did not decide for that name, given the problems with the ethnos in ethnomusicology or in ethnology, of course. And I'm a bit doubtful that archives could do very much about it, except when it comes to categories. So not presenting fixed categories, although this is our job. This is a problem. So every category must be annotated, saying this music is not representative for this country because there is no such thing as representative music. in our opinion as anthropologists, because it constantly changed. And if you ask, for example, if you go to Sweden, probably a person from Lapland will tell you something totally different of what a typical Swedish song is than a guy from Stockholm, probably, I suppose. And probably you come up with a samba because it's just hip to listen to a certain samba sung in Swedish or something, or a tango from Finland. I mean, this could be supposedly typical music where you would say, like, okay, this is not what I expected to be typical ethnic music from Finland. So this is a bit of the job you can do. Deconstruction is not very hip, but still, I think it's still necessary to do that. This is something you could do with categories. And of course, it could go public. And of course, when I have visited to the archives and I play the talking drum, everybody's happy. This is what they expect when it comes to African music. So this is what I tend to avoid, to play every now and then. I still do it. But rather go for hip-hop or kuduro, which is some sort of highly electronic music from Angola, which nobody really expects from when it comes to African music, or house music from South Africa or whatever. Also going, of course, to high life, where everybody says, like, but this is Latin American music. No, it's not, although it sounds like it, it's influenced and so on. So getting away from the fixed categories and trying to make to bring to people's mind that African music, in this case, has been globalized for quite some 100 years in certain respects. I mean, if you think how early the guitar arrived there, you get an idea that the ethnos is more of a concept that we have in mind than that actually takes place on the ground, although it may in tribalized or ethnicized context.
I'm going to cycle back around to the beginning when we're talking about ethnomusicology and archives. I guess where I sit, I see the archive as a very neutral place, because I'm in a space where the Smithsonian, I'm surrounded by folklorists, anthropologists, and people in American studies field, and even artists who want to come use the archive of musical sounds as art pieces for collage. Right, so, you know, I think a lot of these kinds of discussions are the kinds of things that go on within those fields. But the archive will just sort of be there, and as long as you can get the information so that people can access everything. Of course, as I said before, I'd still love to have people from all the different fields publish their take on what they're finding. But I guess, to me, I don't know if I'd want to get in the middle of those debates about, within other fields. So, yeah.
The time is running. I understood that at 6 o'clock. Yes. So, okay, I have one topic still, and the last topic.
Just one question. What do you think about the type of overall systematization in the sense of
Alan Lomac's Cantomatics project, just taking one point, starting from a main area and then going to the fringes? What about this type of sort of map or type of systematization regarding different parameters in music?
Would you like to answer the question?
Did you understand?
Yes, of the Lomac's type of statistics about different features in music around the world, and
well, he started, I think, with the main area in West Africa concerning the song style, and then he went to the fringes regarding the eastern parts of Africa. And I think it's a very interesting approach, but it wasn't extended to dance styles or something like that, just an approach regarding styles and overall systematization.
Yes, I think that perhaps the Koehn map could be quite interesting solution, and we could use the audio files instead of analyzed, notated, transcribed material Lomac's used. So we would have a very, very nice new kind of map of different musics around the world using the map by Koehn. This is my suggestion. But perhaps the second question was not so difficult. I thought you are quite happy with the word ethnomusicological archives. But the last topic I would like to quickly go through with you is the audience of archives in the future, and what kind of new services archives could have. At least in Finland, for example, libraries have nowadays very strange new services. You can borrow a bike from a library and many new things. But do you think that the audience of the future would be a bit different of the audience of today? And could we have very interesting new services? For example, if I would like to get an interesting instrument from Iran, I just put a button and then my 3D printer give the instrument to me, or something else, a robot comes and teach me to play rubber or something else. So what kind of new services archives could be? So this is the last question. Please.
On European art, since last year, there is 600,000 sounds on free access from all from 24 countries, or 12 countries in Europe, and they are public domain and metadata, of course. And for example, from CNRS in France, we have 38,000 sounds on free access, and sometimes, and also picture of our instruments from many museums in Europe, and so, and we for the CNRS we provide 38,000 musical sounds on free access.
Okay, thank you very much. Please.
No, I think it's hard to predict with what new inventions will be around. I mean, I worry about archives with large quantities of things and getting to the end user. I mean, nowadays we're starting to do stuff with social media and blogs and stuff. But what happens 30 years from now? What will exist? The main way people communicate with each other. And I think archives needed to get into that, get out of their buildings and get out into social media. And we have a Facebook site. We put up neat objects so people kind of stumble on it and just get again, I say I have no idea it'll be around in 30, 40 years, but whatever that is, that archives need to, as part of what they're doing, take that into account. Yeah, so.
Even with the risk of repeating myself. Yeah. So I would just end up, I mean, what is definitely important is to reach out as an archive, not as early generations sometimes tended to, we have our treasures here and you're not coming near, but rather really going out, trying to meet people, inviting musicians, very important aspect. I found this always very inspiring when musicians came over. We had Congolese, Mali, and whatever musicians who sometimes performed, sometimes just traveled to Mainz just to visit the archive. Well, then living in France usually, because otherwise the trip would have been too far from African countries. But still, people being there and that would come back to my point that the archive as space is interesting as well. So create a space where people like to meet, where people like to use the material, where people get intrigued maybe by the very existence of, if they're instruments, of the instruments, of course, if they're records, just of the records. Even the shellac record could be something fascinating, especially in the future when it's getting older and older and more ancient. Fascinating. So this is something, given that, of course, what Rolf said before, that everything seems to be available on the internet, why would I have to use the archive? And I guess the aura of the object is something that might make it interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is a link to what you said, having a 3D printer to produce something. I was at a conference in Montreal, and there was a Japanese presenting an approach where you could draw on the screen some kind of figure, like a toy, and then there was how many tones do you want to play? 5, and then there was an algorithm placing some holes in the figure and hollowing the figure, and then you could print it, and you could get it and play it. And I think this is not very far from now that we can actually do this, because we have everything at our hand. We can simulate these production mechanisms of flow instruments, of string instruments. We do it. There are physical models out there. I think this is the future of archives. Not just putting old things into shelves, but making new things with the experience of the old things. So this is something that we can actually do, but we have to do it. And it's not enough to fill a table. It might be a very modern format of the table, but tables are not so sexy. It must be something that you can actually use, and as I said, a MIDI download file that you can use with your player or anything like this. So it must be at your hands. It must give young people the chance to experience something that they cannot get just like this.
So I very, very much agree with this. I feel like interactivity has become really, really important in the social media age. And whether that's a physical archive where you're able to come and interact with old shellac albums or instruments, if that exists in the digital archive, maybe that would be, and you mentioned this a little bit earlier, being able to feel what it feels like to play that music. At MIT right now, we're developing an edX class tentatively called Rhythms of the World, which is essentially teaching students about various different rhythmic traditions, sort of baseline introduction level. But part of that is myself and a couple of other ethnomusicologists are then collaborating with the Iran Agozi, who's the designer of Guitar Hero and Rock Band, those types of games, to make an interactive thing where the students can actually play on their computer keyboard these rhythms and be evaluated on that to sort of feel, did they get it right? How close are they? So, I mean, I don't know if that's something that's feasible in an archive, certainly not for an entire collection, but maybe, once a week you've got here's the rhythm that you're gonna learn this week, or here's the melody that you're gonna learn to play, rhythm of the week. Right, something that allows people to interact with that, and I think that draws them in, and then from there, as you were saying, sort of bounce off onto, you might be interested in listening to these other things if you enjoyed playing this rhythm, or listen to this track and you'll be able to feel the thing that you were just playing, and being able to make it something that's physical, especially when we're moving into the digital world so much, to keep it, because music is physical, we move to it, so to keep it physical, to keep it something that we can do and not just passively receive, I think.
Yeah, I stick to all of what you said. We're printing musical instruments in 3D printer. Maybe we see something tomorrow on this. So we're very close. But I have another point which I found is necessary for, and this is also a motivation for this symposium, that there are so many archives around. I mean, there are over 600 archives around. Nobody is going through all these archives to look for something. Nowadays, you need to have one homepage, one page where you can get access to everything, and you need to have a real good search engine. And then the people will be pointed to archives we've never thought of would exist. And so you need to have a meta structure which is building all that. Otherwise, most archives will never be accessed. The Smithsonian will not have this problem. When you, yes. Yes. That's a very good starting point for us. The question is, what is the search engine then? And so with the Koehn maps, which is that where we have got all these combined and all this analyzed in terms of similarity, you may get close to something like a search engine which is more intelligent and which could bring people to other archives and other things, rather than just looking for countries or looking for. Of course, the motivation is what's in the net. If you listen to a radio station, something, then you get suggestions of what's tunes to look for next. These algorithms are much too simple for us. But I think this is the thing which we need to have in the future, because otherwise nobody would listen to our music.
Okay, well, yeah, I think everything has been said, and time is running out. In whatever way we try to get our content to people, we have to do it in some unique way, just to not get drowned out by the enormous digital noise floor on the internet that is so enormous and that is so hard to cut through. So we have to come up with something smart.
Yes, as a result of this symposium, I would like to have some suggestion. Maybe we can make some one homepage. In this homepage, we can find any homepage, any address of homepage of different archive. That's as a central of, maybe will be in Hamburg University. It is possible as a result of this symposium, because that's very useful, and maybe with a spatial description. For example, if you want find something about South Africa, these archives are geeignet. And about this practical experience with archive, I have one suggestion, because in any museum in Germany is very advanced in this area. Museum has some department for education. That means education department or pedagogy department. Like this, we can have some suggestion for archive. We have some, and a special for children. The children can experience with all instruments. For example, in Halle is city of Handel, George Friedrich Handel. Is a house of Handel is now is one museum, and they have an educational department, and children can come there and they can experience with this instrument. Or in Leipzig too. Maybe for archive also is a very good idea. Maybe if we have some department, and two suggestions I have, maybe.
Okay, so just one suggestion to the end of this discussion, this panel. You know, Internet of Things. So we could have an Internet of archive files discussing independently with each other. So this was a joke, okay. So thank you very much. I'm sorry we can't continue the discussion. The concert is coming very soon. So thank you very much, and have a nice evening.